Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out more extra history. We're going to be continuing their series on Justinian and Theodora. The first two episodes had a lot of emphasis on Justinian. We haven't gotten nearly as much Theodora. We learned a little bit about her backstory, which maybe we can imply some things about what make her this uniquely powerful woman in her time, but I don't really have that much to base it on besides that little bit of backstory we got there. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about her. She's at the forefront when it comes to the thumbnail in this video, so I assume we're going to get a little bit more about her. The episode is called Purple is the Noblest Shroud. Purple, in the case of the Roman Empire, is this color of power and royalty and stuff like that. The purple you'd get there, it's not like the same purple most people would find. Like if you pulled a crayon out and you found purple, the purple we see is a bit on the bluer side, but their purple would have had a little bit more of a mix of red. I don't know if it would be fair to call it magenta. I think it's like, it might be a little bit off of that, but it's a slightly redder version of purple back then. I don't know if that's the same here as it would be in like the older Roman Empire, because our perception of purple has kind of changed a little bit over. That feels like such a ridiculous thing to say, but yeah, like my go-to purple is not the same go-to purple that they would have had back then. So not really that important, but I just thought that's always a fun little fact about that comes up when it comes to the Romans. The emphasis on purple, but it's not our purple, it's their very specific purple that we wouldn't even like. A lot of us probably wouldn't even be like that. Hey, that's just another shade of purple. No, I'd probably find another name for what that color is, but nope, that's purple to them. All right, I've rambled about purple too much. Let's get started with the actual video.
We stand upon execution grounds in Constantinople. 7 men are lined up to die. One by one, they drop. The first man falls, ropes snap taut, feet tremble. The second man falls, then the third, the fourth, and the fifth. Then the final 2 drop. There's a deafening crack, a retort that rings throughout the courtyard. Then silence, and then frantic action. 2 men are on the ground, gasping, grabbing their necks. The echoes of the sound, a sound not of bones breaking, but of ropes snapping, still bounce from the stone. The guards look about confused. The executioner has yet to even become aware of his error.
He looked so proud of the job he did. He was like, yeah, I killed him. I did a good job. Did I do a good job, guys? But this is actually, I'm not that surprised that he wouldn't notice here. When you were doing these executions on big platforms like this, and like where the ground would give out underneath them and they would just fall through, it was very common for them to just die from their neck snapping. You fall down and the whole weight of your body is still going, but your neck stops. So naturally your neck in most cases would end up just snapping, and then it's just like, boom, you're done. Every once in a while you might get the case of like shaking the feet or something. You might be strangled for a little bit there, but in a lot of cases it could potentially be pretty quick. I guess it is different depending on how much the person weighs or whatever, but the executioner might not notice because he just assumed it was a quick and easy, like, snap, done, it's over, and he just assumed, yeah, that was a quick one. They didn't have any dangling going on there. No, they were instantaneous. That was a good one, but nope, you did a bad job, Mr. Executioner. Your ropes were no good. I don't know who's at fault for this, but damn.
A group of monks from the nearby monastery of St. Conon, who have been watching from the crowd, surge forward to gather up the men. They can't let such suffering continue. The guards move to stop them, but the crowd bars their way. The monks procure a small boat and row the men across the winter waters of the Bosporus to the Church of St. Lawrence to ask sanctuary of the priests inside. Soon the guards arrive, but the men are already safely within the church. They have sanctuary. The guard commander posts men at all the exits. He'll starve them out. It's not long before a crowd starts to gather. The men who were hanged, and the men who escaped, these were men of the Demes, men of the chariot racing factions that played such a huge part in Byzantine life. The Demes, the sports clubs that had a hand in everything from running the city fire departments to making major political decisions, had become more and more unruly, more and more lawless over the
Oh, these guys, yeah. So they were very popular, though. So I'd imagine if you're, first of all, your monks giving them sanctuary. Like, what is more noble than something like that? But they're also like relatively popular. So I'd imagine starving out a bunch of monks who are protecting what are like these weird political celebrities in a sense. Like, I'd imagine this is not going to be a very popular decision. I assume that's where we're going with this.
Preceding years. During a riot that had broken out after a chariot race a few weeks earlier, several people were murdered. A little hooliganry could be tolerated, but that was too much. Order had to be maintained in the capital.
Though.
So 7 of the
sense.
ringleaders were marked to die for their crimes. But 2 of them didn't die, and they would serve as the tinder that would set Constantinople alight. On January 13th, 532, the Emperor Justinian entered his box in the Hippodrome, like he would for any other race. But these races, the races to celebrate the Ides of January, were to be different. The crowd began to shout for clemency, to beg the emperor to forgive the 2 men still holed up in the church. Race after race went by, and they continued to loudly implore the emperor. But the emperor was silent. He'd had too much of the Demes controlling his city. Law would be restored. But as the last few races were being set up, the crowd's chant changed. They began to chant, "Long live the merciful blues and greens," because, as fortune dictated, of the men hiding in the church, the ones who'd escaped, one was from each of the Demes.
Oh.
Suddenly, someone shouted, "Nika." Then the crowd, perhaps tens of thousands strong, began to shout it at the emperor.
What does that mean?
Was the cry for victory. It meant conquer, and usually the blues and greens would shout it at one another, taunting each other as their racers won, or encouraging their champions as they sped around the track. But here, now with one voice, the entire stadium screamed it at the emperor.
Dude, that's really poetic. Like, sometimes things like extra history make me think about history in the context of like storytelling. Like, sometimes I forget that, like, oh, this is real stuff that happened, because this just feels like well written storytelling and stuff like that. And it really makes me wonder why historical movies suck so bad. Like, there's very few like outstanding historical movies that do history well. Like, very rarely you have like a good movie that is also historically accurate. Sometimes there are some not so accurate movies that are actually pretty fun to watch, and then you have some just that are bad across the board. This is like already like the setup for a movie. There's something there. Like, those 2 guys could be your protagonists. There's something there. I don't know. Makes me wonder, like, why do these movies have to suck so bad? There's so much great source material.
The Demes had always been kept in check by one another. They were never united, and so the emperor could play them against each other when the need was nearest. But here they stood as one, chanting. This must have been a terrifying moment. The emperor's guard hastily led him out of his box and down the specially constructed tunnel that connected his seat in the hippodrome to the palace. The emperor was shaken, but he wasn't going to be cowed by the mob. They'd likely fall back into their rivalries before nightfall. But
that's like the supposed underground tunnel that they have that you can use to get out of like the White House or something, right? I don't know if there how much truth there is behind that. I assume that's actually a real thing, but like that's kind of cool that he has his little tunnel system, his little secret door. But
the mob, now united, flooded out into the streets of Constantinople, burning and looting as they went. They made their way to the palace and set the palace gate ablaze, but the fire spread. First, the Church of Sancta Sophia, the great center of worship for the capital, caught alight and was consumed by the flames. Then the baths, the great baths of Zeuxippus, the baths built by Constantine himself when he founded the city, adorned with treasures assembled from around the world, fell victim to the flame, the ash and tinder of antiquity floating off into the night sky. By dawn, much of the Augusteum, the palace quarter, was in cinders. But when the city woke, it wasn't the stunned and subdued city Justinian had hoped for. For 5 more days, the riot burned through the city. The palace was under siege, the prison was razed to the ground, and its prisoners loosed. And through all this, fire. Fire spread through every quarter, burnt its way through the wood and timber, leaping from house to house as the riot raged around it. And the riot itself was a servant of the fire, keeping those who would try to stay it, those who were part of the bucket brigades or part of the civic corps, fighting in the streets while the city burned.
So this is all essentially for people who are kind of the like modern day equivalents or the equivalents of their time to like the modern day soccer hooligans. And it's kind of interesting seeing ordinary people kind of just fighting so hard for their pardon. I think of like today, and I don't know what it would take to get people going crazy over somebody's pardon. Like, nobody's like in the street like, pardon Tiger King. Like, it was a joke, and people were saying that, but it's not going to get people up in arms and that sort of thing. We have people like Edward Snowden or something. It doesn't get people in the streets. We've got all sorts of people who, yeah, we want like a pardon for, but like it never gets to this point. And these guys seemingly have like some legitimate crimes that were committed, that they were involved with. Like there is definitely a reason why they were arrested, and it was probably a pretty good reason from like the setup here. Like it seems like people got killed, people were hurt. So I'm not saying that you got to execute them, but like it's kind of interesting that people can kind of overlook that. It really speaks to like the cultural significance of these like chariot race things. That's cool.
And then, on Sunday the 18th, as smoke covered Constantinople and nearly a quarter of the largest city in the world lay in smoldering ruin, the crowd again gathered for the games. Justinian, cowed for perhaps the only time in his career, came out and told the crowd he would give their men pardon. But now that wasn't enough. The crowd shouted that they wanted evil officials removed. They shouted for removal of the city prefect, the man who had been responsible for the arrest of their leaders in the first place. This was to be expected. Justinian acquiesced. The crowd called out the names of Tribonian, Justinian's legal advisor who had rewritten the law code, and John the Cappadocian, the empire's taxman.
Can't do that, man. Those are your boys.
These men were corrupt, but their corruption didn't particularly affect the poor citizens of Constantinople. This wasn't the sort of request the mob would make. No.
This is a common factor that I see against traditionally weaker leaders. They'll give in to one thing, and you would think like, oh, you give in to the mob on the thing they want. Well, it shows the mob that they have power over you and that they can exercise that power. There is like a right place and right time, seemingly, to give in to popular opinion or whatever. Like there is definitely a time for that, but a lot of the leaders that suffered the most from mob action, they waited out until they are too riled up, and now they need to be satisfied, and this is just the form that it's going to be taking, I guess.
This meant they were being backed by senators, by powerful men, perhaps some of the very same men who took shelter with him in the palace, who stood next to him while the mob howled outside. This spooked Justinian. He accepted these terms. He offered a full pardon to everyone involved. But even this wasn't enough.
Oh, God.
The crowd had been primed. In their fury, they called for a new emperor. Justinian again retreated to his palace and conferred with his advisors. He began to make plans to take the treasury and those men loyal to him and board ships to flee across the Bosporus. Meanwhile, the mob raged through the city. The nephews to Anastasius, the previous emperor, still lived. Why were the people of Constantinople serving as slaves to this upstart emperor born a peasant when they had men of royal blood that they could elevate to the purple? As the riots had spread over the preceding days, most of Anastasius...
Oh, hold on one second. Yeah, right here we have... That's what I would think of when I think of purple, but that's not the color you would typically see in like the old Rome stuff. I don't know if this indicates that they were on to a new purple at this point, or if that's just how they happened to, or if that was just an artistic choice in this particular video. Like I'm not sure, but since that was something that I mentioned earlier, yeah, like this is not what like the old Romans would consider. This is not what they are talking about when they say purple, typically. That's what I'm saying.
That they could elevate to the purple. As the riots had spread over the preceding days, most of Anastasius's remaining kin had fled the city, but one aging relative of the old emperor remained, a man named Hypatius. Hypatius never wanted.
He sounds familiar.
In fact, he was hiding under his bed when the mob arrived, but they found him and carried him on their shoulders back to the hippodrome to crown him and proclaim him their emperor. But as this was happening, Theodora, Empress of Rome, looked at the trembling men around her, counseling her husband to flee, and said, "Whether or not a woman should give an example of courage to men is neither here nor there. At a moment of desperate danger, one must do what one can. I think that flight, even if it brings us to safety, is not in our interest. Every man born to see the light of day must die, but that one who has been emperor should become an exile I cannot bear." May I never be without the purple I wear, nor live to see the day when men do not call me your majesty. If you wish safety, my lord, that is an easy matter. We are rich, and there is the sea, and yonder our ships. But consider whether if you reach safety, you may not desire to exchange that safety for death. As for me, I like the old saying, that the purple is the noblest shroud. There was a silence in the hall, and
That's kind of badass, but I can't tell if I hate her or not. It's kind of that like, it's cool that she's being brave, but like, it's kind of an element that is common in like high and mighty royalty throughout history, that it's just like, I can't relate to that very well, I guess. Like, I kind of find it's cool that she's standing up and being like, yeah, defend what's yours or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But also, like, if that's like the way she delivers it, I'm not sure how I feel about her. Like, this is just one small moment, and it's giving me mixed feelings. And I suppose that's fine. I assumed I was going to have mixed feelings about these guys anyway. Not everybody is a saint. Not everybody is a perfect Chad like some of the previous people are, who like stand up for the right thing and always do it in the most badass fashion. Like, I'm okay with having a little bit of a mixed feeling on her, I guess.
and shame. Then Justinian said, "Get me Belisarius, Mundus, and Narses." While the palace guards had not been enough to quell the riot, as luck would have it, Belisarius, Justinian's greatest general, happened to be in the city waiting to be reassigned, and Mundus, the great Germanic general who had long defended the empire's northern frontier, was also passing through the city on his way to take up Belisarius' old post. Neither of them had their armies with them, but they did have their personal legions. At Justinian's command, they gathered their men.
That might be enough to
The
take
last
care of a
man
mob.
Justinian gathered,
We'll
Narses,
see.
was a deceptively frail man, a thin Armenian eunuch serving in the palace. Justinian trusted Narses. Narses was his master of the treasury, and as a eunuch, Narses could never become emperor, so Justinian could ask Narses to do the very thing that had allowed his family to usurp the throne in the first.
Eunuchs are strange. Like, they're very present in royal court and stuff, and like, I don't understand like the origins, or like, I get like the reasoning behind it, like, and I believe there in a lot of cultures are like religious reasons behind it, but like, that's something that's present throughout a lot of different royal cultures that I never really took the time to understand, like how they became so prevalent. I don't know if it's like as common in the case of the Byzantines as it is in like some other countries. I know there's a lot of Eastern countries that have a lot of eunuchs in their royal history. It's interesting.
First place. Take a big bag of money, slip out of the palace, and bribe those opposing him. Narses made his
That
way
makes
to the
sense.
hippodrome, unnoticed, quietly following the stair that took him to the box where the leaders of the Blues stood as the crowd shouted and cheered for Hypatius. Narses reminded them that Justinian favored the Blues, and you know that Hypatius guy's a green, right? Before putting a small stack of gold in each of their
God.
hands. Soon after, members of the Blues started to silently disperse. But the hippodrome was still filled with tens of thousands of blues and greens milling about the arena floor. Belisarius planned a commando raid to snatch Hypatius and flee, but he found the way blocked, so the order was given. Belisarius and his men entered from the east, while Mundus entered from the west. They marched in a line, cutting down all before them. People panicked and fled, clambered over each other,
That's
were
dark.
trampled as they ran, but impassive, the soldiers marched on. By the end of the day, 30,000 people lay dead in the hippodrome, and Justinian's reign would never be challenged again. Join us next week as we watch Justinian rebuild Constantinople, and Belisarius sets out to recapture the West.
Sick. That was a very vulnerable moment, and it gives you a lot when it comes to Theodora. More from Theodora than Justinian. I was getting concerned because we were getting further and further into it, and it's like, we still don't have any Theodora. And then we have that moment, which I think is a very strong expression of, I guess, her identity. This was a very vulnerable moment, and it's very possible, like, if the wrong people decided they weren't going to remain loyal to Justinian, a lot could have gone wrong. Like, we have Like the military guys, like if either of them decided they weren't going to back him, like this would have been a great coup opportunity. Like anybody could have like really shifted the balance of power in this case and really worked against him. So it's kind of remarkable that they managed to do that. It clearly required a lot of iron-fistedness, you know, just clamp down on them, slaughter the enemies and such, you know, the usual. So this was interesting, and I'm excited to continue this series a little bit more. I am liking the political drama. I'm curious about how I'm going to feel about these two by the end. Because I know people who are really into Justinian, and I don't know for what reason. I don't know if it's like a complex political character, a complex view that they take of him, or they just think he's really cool. And if they think he's really cool, I don't know where they see that just yet, but it's still early. We've only been through one crisis of confidence in the leader. I mean, we've got plenty more time, so... Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video. All right.